Just give us your initial thoughts about this election result. What did the Labor Party do wrong, or is this more of an indication of broader dissatisfaction with incumbent governments around the world in the wake of the pandemic and the economic challenges that are now facing a lot of major economies?
Look, I think a bit of both. The Labor Party didn't quite switch out of COVID gear, and the type of highly centralised decision-making, fairly unpredictable, sometimes chaotic policy-making that went with COVID carried on after COVID, and now there's a job, I think, just to settle policy down, to rebuild investor confidence, and to get people focused well ahead of COVID rather than looking back to some of the more extreme policies then.
Christopher Luxon has only had 3 years in politics. It's quite extraordinary, but he's confident. He says that he's obviously been a CEO of Air New Zealand. He's got tons of experience when it comes to, M&A and negotiations. What sort of leader do you think he'll be?
I think he'll be successful because he's got the skill set that's required now in New Zealand. We have a quite large current account deficit, one of the largest in the OECD. A need for the public are looking for just sensible, considered management, and there's no doubt that Chris Luxon's got the skills for that. The vote in the election has meant that he'll have a reasonably straightforward political environment, probably better than he might have expected. As you said, he's very new to politics. He's only been there 3 years. We've really never had a Prime Minister enter politics as recently as 3 years and then become Prime Minister. But look, he's shown that he can learn fast. Politics is not the same as business, but I'd have to say the job that now needs to be done in New Zealand is probably more business-like and less political than for some time.
Of course, a lot of how he governs will depend on the final shape of the government. And to that point, one of the surprises this weekend was the big win and the return to Parliament by New Zealand First. Do you expect Winston Peters to be part of that government?
Well, that's yet to be seen. There's quite a few knife-edge results in the election that have yet to be resolved that will make a difference there. But even if it looks like he'd be needed for a government majority, I think you would find he'll find himself in a less of a bargaining position than he has done in the last, I think, 3 coalitions he was part of, including negotiations with my government in 2017. So, and look, the parties here, Chris Luxon, Winston Peters, are all sounding pretty reasonable and constructive. Because they know that the public aren't interested in a whole lot more politics. They've had that right through post-COVID. It's one of the reasons they got rid of the last government. It's too much politics and not enough performance. And now they just want a government form so they can get back to work, lift investor confidence and start sorting out some of the accumulated microeconomic problems.
One of the common pledges by all sides seems to be cutting government spending. Is this a good time for such moves, which include tax cuts?
Well, it is surprising, isn't it? I mean, even the incumbent government as a centre-left party had some of its signature moves early in the campaign were to announce spending cuts. And I think it's less about people's sense of whether this is the right part of the cycle, and more general concern about just large-scale waste overflowing from COVID. That is why I think the voters bought the argument that middle-income tax cuts should happen. They're under cost of living pressure, but they believe they can have those tax cuts at the same time as a bit of a clean-up of government expenditure. So the tax cuts won't be at the expense of public services or public service performance.